Welcome, everyone, to the Aspen City Council work session of April 6th. We're going to have a little bit of a short work session. We only have one topic to discuss, although it's complicated. And then we do have a special meeting lined up for after that. We will not be doing our city attorney review since we're down to a 3-person council today. Bill is having to go back to a funeral, and Christine is on travel commitments that keep her away. So we'll just open up, and we're going to be talking about downtown right-of-way enforcement and some of the direction our staff is seeking. Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor Richards. Good afternoon, Council. My name is Emmy Oliver, Lodging and Commercial Core Program Manager. Appreciate you all having us here to talk to you this afternoon. Aaron, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yes, my name is Aaron Reed. I'm the Plans and Construction. My name is Aaron Reed. I am with the Engineering Department as the Plans and Construction Supervisor.
Okay, thank you.
So the purpose of our discussion tonight is to look at how the business community is using our public spaces. Specifically, we'll be discussing pop-ups, sandwich board signs, and bicycle fleets, all in the right-of-way. These topics have broad impacts to our right-of-way, and they are a little bit challenging for staff to navigate in terms of enforcement. Our goal in bringing these items to council is to hear your direction on enforcement related to each topic. So we would like to know as staff, is our current approach adequate, or would council like for staff to propose alternatives for you to consider at a later date? So for the format of the presentation, for each topic, we'll have 2 to 3 slides outlining kind of the context and information around the current state of affairs for each topic, and then we'll have a slide that presents 2 questions that we'd like your feedback on. to note, we have not included any staff recommendations on these topics. This is intended as purely informational for you to support your discussion and decisions. After we finish looking at the 3 items on the screen, we'll hold some space to touch on any additional items that council may have identified that are similarly affecting the right-of-way. So before we begin, it's important to keep in mind a few desired outcomes for this discussion. First and foremost, we have a responsibility to maintain the right-of-way for the safety and the accessibility of the traveling public. We want to make sure we keep that top of mind as we go through these topics. Second, we know that businesses in many ways have come to be dependent on use of the right-of-way. And so we want to be sure that we're considering their needs, especially in the current economy, and that we're balancing our support for them with our obligations to maintain our right-of-way. And then lastly, we want to understand this council's preferences for how we enforce policies around right-of-way use, and your direction on that will help staff ensure the fair and consistent application of policies for everyone who's using these spaces. So, jumping right in with our first topic, the photos on the screen are of what we are calling pop-up activations. As you can see, they come in all shapes and sizes. They range from stationary installations like the photo on the left to push carts or even small vehicles like you see in the center. These are temporary. They can last from several hours to several days in staff's observations. They frequently occupy space in the right-of-way, specifically sidewalks and our walking malls, but sometimes we see them in parking spaces as well. We have observed their primary function is for promoting the business they're in front of, but sometimes they are used to promote a brand or a different business altogether, and you can see that again in the photo in the middle. Pop-ups can offer a presence only for a business, such as in the photo on the right, or they may provide something free of charge to folks that are passing by. From the business perspective, pop-ups can really enhance their visibility. They help draw attention to brick and mortar locations, and they can also create a presence for a brand that may not be within Aspen, again, like we just saw. They also contribute to the vitality of the core, right? Because they can really create kind of a buzz around them. They can create a feeling of community for folks who are stopping and kind of gathering as they pass by one of these. On the contrary, and as you can see in the photo on the screen, pop-ups can create challenging conditions for maintaining accessibility on sidewalks. While some locations may be on wider sidewalks where it's easier to maintain that minimum required space, others might not have that same space and might be on a more narrow sidewalk where it's harder to keep that space clear. Because staff don't have a permitting function for these pop-ups, we're not able to consistently ensure that food or drink vendors that might be employed here are licensed and that they're maintaining appropriate food safety standards. We would also note that in many cases, businesses are doing pop-ups on the weekends, and this can be challenging for staff to stay on top of, frankly, since many of us aren't at work on the weekends. We're here Monday through Friday. We also tend to see pop-ups during larger events like food and wine and during holiday when they can really, again, maximize their visibility with a busy town. Current internal policy dictates that if staff is contacted by a business asking to do a pop-up, we generally tell them they are not permitted in the right-of-way, and we can offer a suggestion that they may activate on private property if they can find it and someone to agree to allow them to do that. That is permitted by the land use code. However, while we don't actively patrol town for pop-ups when they are in the right-of-way, if staff notices one as we're walking through town, we will contact the business and ask them to remove it. And then we, of course, also respond to these on a complaint-only basis. So this brings us to our first set of questions around pop-ups for council. The first one is, does council wish to permit the use of city right-of-way for pop-up activations by businesses? And then the second question is, if yes, we can go to that one if we get that answer.
Okay, thank you. You know, it's interesting, I haven't run into too many of the pop-ups when I've been in downtown, bad days or bad timing. But I do remember on the Hyman Avenue Mall when we had a shop that would have people hanging out the door and, here, have a sample of this cream, please, come on in, have a sample of this, please. And it was really irritating. They were very aggressive. And so I don't know how we write a code such that it's really not harassing our guests, you know, because, and they weren't a pop-up, they were just sitting outside the doors of their establishment to kind of do that. So I just kind of wanted to put that out there first. I know we got a number of complaints and people just felt harassed. But I know that, again, Bill not being here and Christine, they have sent some comments in. And Pete, if you want to let us know what they said on the pop-up issue.
Yeah, in fact, both of them were very consistent in kind of their feelings around this. And I think for question number one, they both were supportive of short-term kind of usage of the right-of-way for temporary pop-ups, usually like 1 to 3 days, I think was their maximum, but appreciated the vitality that they brought. And both individuals expressed that similar view.
Okay. Council members, what are your thoughts on it? Either one?
I agree. I do believe that there's a place and time for this, so I say yes. And there should be a short-term activation to it. It shouldn't be forever. And also, I just feel like this is one of those things where it being permitted, but there's still not formal regulation, but the city staff or someone should be going over there to kind of coach them on how to be a polite pop-up versus an intrusive one, hopefully in a very informal way, but one that they get the picture from. So that doesn't become an issue where we do have to regulate it more heavily.
So kind of a standardized handout with, you know, suggested protocols and this is what we expect.
Yeah, and I've only seen, at least personally, polite pop-ups, but if one was doing all those negative things like blocking the sidewalk or being overly aggressive, I think they would need to be coached on you might ruin this for everyone else, but if you can be a polite pop-up, then this is a nice activation. People love free stuff and they love, you know, seeing these out and about.
Yeah, I agree with you. I'm just, the only reason I said handout is so that if there's a message to one, it's consistent to all, you know, and they could kind of stick with it that way.
Yeah.
What do you think, John?
I'll go along with the majority. I do think it adds to messy vitality, but it does give me pause when I look at question number 2.
Yeah.
Right? Which is, if we're going to do one, we got to do 2.
Yeah, yeah. I will agree as well. I think that there's a few things we could start to work with on the regulatory framework and, you know, let these guys take it back and massage it and say what's practical, what's not practical. The one thing I was thinking, of course, is there should be a notification to staff. You know, we're intending to do this on these dates. And, you know, that we should, if we're putting in a regulatory framework, I would think that would be one of the first things. I think, you know, when someone's coming over, maybe we take some chalk out with us and say, this is where the right-of-way begins. This is where you can't go over. And so kind of give them that real clear, don't give them an inch, take a mile type of proximity of the size of what sort of thing they can do. I agree there should be some time limits for a number of days or, you know, and I guess my questions will be that we need to make sure there's a real security. I don't want people leaving a stand out overnight that people at 2 a.m. can trash or is something that will blow over when we have a bad windstorm. So I think there's a little bit of, you know, safety or security that we want to take a look into. We've already talked about that there's no sales allowed at these. They're not a new retail space, so that should be very clear. I think, we're talking about making sure that they stay clean, that, they don't end up with a litter problem because everyone drops the popsicle sticks when they leave, or that they're responsible for cleaning up any waste product, or just that they maintain the character of the area and make sure it's clean. The other last thing was really, there should be a limited number per year. I don't think that this is something that you have a pop-up every weekend. I don't know what those numbers are, and give you guys a little chance to think about it, but it shouldn't be that this has become a 52-a-week-year stand that somebody regularly has. Things like that. And as we've all talked about, this is about bringing vitality. I don't think that creates a real screen of any sort to what type of pop-up or not, but I do think it gives us an ability to say, this is what we expect from a pop-up. This is the only reason we're allowing pop-ups, are for the vitality, for community interest, for interest of those, enjoying our downtown. I don't know if there's other areas that I think we make it clear that the parking spaces are not allowed to be used for pop-ups. They cannot be on the sidewalks. And if you guys have other items that you think we should ask for in a framework, let us know now.
I think on this one particularly, because they do just kind of appear, I think oftentimes we don't have a lot of lead time. Somebody might, be driving across the country on a tour with these things and, show up in front of a building with one of these things. What I'm hearing a little bit is perhaps rather than a full permit, that maybe some really sound educational materials.
Yeah, I just used the notification to staff that we expect to be notified, and how long, and what will you be, giving out. What do you guys think? I don't see it as a permit activity per se.
No, I don't know. I'd like to think we could start with some strong suggestions as to how many times a year and how many days in a row. Again, I'd leave it to staff to make a judgment call like that, but it would be nice if we could start from that point and see how it goes before we have to enact full regulations.
And, clearly, these are associated with the business that they're in front of. It's not that someone can pop up in front of somebody else's business. And so we need to make that clear about not blocking a neighboring business's storefront or their activities.
And we have seen them not necessarily promoting the business that's in that brick and mortar location. They may be associated with that business, but promoting a different brand than the business that's in a brick and mortar location. So am I hearing that we don't want that, and we want it just to be associated with the business?
Yeah, I was just going to ask, are the businesses who let someone pop up in front that may be associated, oh, sure, you can do, are they charging the person to say, hey, you can pop up in front of my store? I don't really mind.
Yeah, that's a great question.
Brand collaboration.
Well, I can see a brand collaboration, but I'm just saying, I want to make sure we're not getting pop-ups that the brick and mortar owner is charging you to be a pop-up in front of my store on the public right-of-way. I think we need to make sure that they're not becoming commercialized spaces.
We could make that a condition,
Yeah.
certainly, yeah.
It's kind of like not short-term renting your affordable housing unit, it's come on, guys.
Particularly when it's city property that you're
Yeah,
renting.
somebody will think there's something there. But again, and just some consistent materials of what we expect and why.
Okay, great. We can certainly go work on
Do you have
that.
anything there, Pete?
Well, I guess I'm listening to this and I'm just wondering how easily this is to navigate when it can't be associated with the store, but we don't have actual guidelines or regulatory direction. Like, there's going to be an enforcement problem, I think, at some level. I mean, we can suggest all we want.
But you're saying that unless they become terms of a permit that someone has signed to, They're just suggestions to them.
It kind of feels that way when I'm sitting here, and I don't know how, I mean, we can certainly hope that we have good partnership between the community, the business community and the city, but I can also see that getting pushed in certain circumstances. So I just don't know how
Well,
much
yeah, that's what
stability we have
We're
with
here to
this.
hear from people who've dealt with this before in professional opinions, so.
Yeah, I mean, I think it is this question with anything we try to regulate downtown. I mean, because I think if you go down the path, and we're gonna be having a conversation on a couple other topics tonight that might have a slightly different approach. I do think once you go down a regulatory path, it becomes a sort of a binary choice of regulate or not. But I do think that if we put some clear parameters around this as a start, and I do think it's important to us just to hear from you that this is something you support as a concept, because I think staff's been unclear about that sort of basic question about whether or not this is something we even want to tolerate.
Yeah.
As a starting point. But I do think that on this one, they tend to be relatively irregular, they tend to be episodic, they tend not to fall into some of the things that you identified as concerns. They tend to be, short-term. So, I think we could start there without going into a full permit activity. I think that translates this into something different. But we could maybe try going down that path first with some clear expectations, and this is what happens when it becomes a problem.
Yeah.
But
And, again, as you guys kind of have time to work on it and polish those up, I think we can get that out through the Chamber of Commerce pretty well. They might include it in their monthly newsletter or something like that. And so then we can take feedback that the chamber gets, whether it's from the guests or from other businesses or things like that, and let the chamber know we'd love any feedback on this summer's effort with it.
I also would add to that just by saying all these topics, I was wondering if CCLC had taken a look and if it's appropriate for them to share to weigh in on these topics.
Yeah, and we did bring this to CCLC at their meeting last week, which unfortunately due to spring break, they didn't have
A quorum.
They did have a quorum, but that was all they had. So it was to an audience of 4, and they are interested in it. And I believe they would like to provide comment as soon as they can all get together and formulate that.
Yeah.
You did hear from one CCLC member with comment on sandwich boards tonight.
Yeah, we got that letter, but I guess that makes it a little awkward timing. I appreciate you bringing that up of,
Yep.
if they were to come back and say, hey, we don't want to do this at all, I think. Thank you. If they were to come back and say they're not interested in this at all, they don't think we should do it, that would be a serious concern for me. But if they're generally okay with letting the experiment run this summer down this path, then that would be fine. But if they do have objections, we want to hear it, and we'd love to have it come back to us.
Yeah, I think this could be an iterative process where you can have another bite at the apple too.
Yeah,
after.
yeah, okay. Very good.
Okay, so I'm hearing majority for an informational campaign and potentially like a trial for,
Yeah,
For
with
the summer.
guidelines that we're
Yes.
explaining to these folks.
okay,
Okay,
excellent. Thank you.
next,
All right, moving on.
the deadly sandwich board conversation.
You knew it. So moving to sandwich board signs. And I want to begin by saying that we could very well have an entire work session on this topic alone. But we just want to get your general impression on it right now. So we'll try and keep it as high level as we can here tonight. But in general, when we're talking about sandwich board signs, we are referring to freestanding signs without wheels. They're usually A-frame, but they could also be more of a pedestal shape supported by a weighted base. Staff sees the majority of sandwich boards in the right-of-way, generally adjacent to the business to which they belong. But we also see them at the entrance to larger buildings that have multiple businesses within them. So
Multiple your signs.
multiple signs, yes, exactly. And then we've also seen sandwich board signs recently on the mall that actually reflect businesses that are several blocks away, so not even within that area.
Oof. Well, that one from Mystique, the pink one, that looks like a tripper. I would easily trip over those legs coming out that far. Very dangerous.
Yeah.
Especially in the evening.
So a little bit of history going back in time. In 2015, the Supreme Court case Reed versus Town of Gilbert, Arizona, determined that municipal sign codes needed to be content neutral. And what that means is that you weren't supposed to need to read the sign to determine if it was compliant with your code. And so at that time in Aspen, sandwich board signs were allowed for tier 2 spaces. So because Reed made it so that the city couldn't regulate signage based on content, that made it really challenging for us to regulate those signs for tier 2 spaces.
And tier 2, you means on the second floor?
Or basement.
Second floor, basement, alley, things that didn't have a street presence, essentially.
No street presence.
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
So we couldn't exactly read the sign and determine whether it belonged to a tier 2 space after Reed. So council at the time made the decision to eliminate sandwich board sign permits altogether following that case. And their decision was based in part on community sentiment that signs should be allowed for all businesses or no businesses. And then staff also presented some research that showed that if all businesses were allowed to have a sandwich board sign, it could mean up to 1,200 signs on our streets, if everyone chose to have one. So with Ordinance 22 of 2017, council eliminated permits for new sandwich board signs and gave a sunset date for all the signs that were currently existing. So enforcement of that ordinance was deferred to the sunset date in 2018. So it gave it a year. In 2018, enforcement of the sign prohibition was delayed to 2019 by Ordinance 24. And then in 2019, Ordinance 18 delayed enforcement to 2020. So there were a couple of ordinances that delayed enforcement by a year each time. So in 2020, staff was set to have a work session on enforcement. However, due to shifting priorities, obviously due to COVID-19, that follow-up was not scheduled. And so this discussion tonight is really the first time council will have revisited the sandwich board sign topic since 2019.
Very good.
So what's on the screen, this is our current sandwich board sign code language. It states that sandwich boards are not permitted on public or private property, and it provides the sunset date of September 28th, 2020 to phase all sandwich boards out. So again, because there was no follow-up in 2020, staff has been operating off the council direction from 2019, which was to delay enforcement. So we know that businesses rely on sandwich boards to provide information and advertising to potential customers. When a business is not immediately adjacent to the right-of-way, the signs can provide critical directions to those businesses. We also know that they're currently prohibited by the land use code. That's probably the most obvious negative from staff's perspective. Clusters of signs can obstruct sidewalks, and they may not provide the required clearance for mobility devices or strollers. They also make snow removal difficult for our staff in the winter, and if snow isn't cleared from below them, it can result in dangerous patches of ice and snow around them like you see in the photo. Because they're prohibited, staff's enforcement mechanisms are very limited when it comes to these. We have no way to regulate their location, their placement, their materials. We're currently interacting with these on a complaint-only basis, and if we get a complaint about a sign, we'll work with the business to adjust it if it's blocking the right-of-way or if it's creating challenges for snow removal. So with that, we have two questions tonight for council around sandwich boards. The first one is, does council want staff to enforce the current sandwich board sign code, which again says that they all needed to be removed by the date in 2020?
Back to the future.
Something like that, yeah.
Okay. Pete, the comments from our colleagues?
Yep, and I'll just say before we get into that, that obviously staff is, here to listen to whatever council has for a direction. We do just really prefer, I think, a direction as opposed to what we've been doing, which is kind of kicking the can down the road a little bit and not knowing how to respond to the issue at hand. In terms of our two missing council members, both were actually entirely in favor of enforcing the existing sandwich board sign code. So that would basically mean to remove those existing out there today,
Okay.
and then to advance some regulatory framework after that.
So make them go away and then consider a possibility of a program to bring them back?
If you want a different framework.
Okay. Great.
Clarifying question?
Yeah, please.
Is the regulation today that they're talking about allegedly allow for tier 2 spaces only? None. Okay.
No,
Okay.
Complete
it's for this
Complete
one.
removal is what it is
And-
right now.
And so, again, staff and our legals interpreted that legal case that you couldn't even say, well, this is for a business that is in a different location and so therefore not allowed. That's
That's correct.
amazing.
That court decision was very impactful across the United States. Millions of dollars were spent rewriting sign codes across the United States to try to deal with it, and it made a lot of sign code very difficult to enforce.
I believe that. Yeah, it's kind of like they've backed us into a bit of an all or nothing situation. And the one thing I've kind of thought a little bit about, and it would be a potential partnership between the city and our right-of-way and private businesses and their property. But, those type of signposts that you see where it's like 2 miles to this and 10 miles to that and 50 miles and 2 blocks, whatever, that could be potentially put in where we have a tree well or something like that in front of a building, like the Mill Street Plaza comes to mind for me because that's where so many are interior and you're starting to see signs, as you said, for things that are a block and a half away or that are just, already have a storefront and now they have a sign too, And so I've just kind of wondered whether there's a way to work with, where people can change the name of the business because they've gone out or there's a new one here. And whether we should look at, is there a way to create a signage program that's not sandwich boards, but that people who were up there on the second floor and still trying to get people to come up, or they're in the basement, would be a little bit of a sign marker that said, these are the businesses in this building, or these are the businesses here. I just, it really is something to look through a number of catalogs for street furniture or, invent our own. But I'd love to be able to offer something different instead of saying, well, not at all, hope you can still pay your rent this year. But we would leave them up until a point in which we've had something else or, it really does not look good. It's not appealing. And if you're not interested in any of those shops or you're not out shopping, it's just kind of like a very random debris in your way. So that's the only thing I really would like us to investigate. Is there a way that, and you'd like to think that the landlords might be offering a lower rent because you don't have the street frontage, or why did you take this spot to begin with? Because it was interior and it's cheaper and I could get in, but now we want to clutter the sidewalks to make up for that. And I have a lot of empathy for anyone trying to run a business in this town and our environment, but
I will say that on one of the properties that was identified in one of the previous images where we do have a lot of sandwich boards, we do have allowances within our sign code for additional, I guess they would be I'm trying to think of the word, but a listing of the businesses, kind of an additional sign allotment that can hang on a building with multiple tenants that give a kind of cataloging or a listing of the businesses that are there. You can kind of see it hanging on the wall just to
Yeah,
the
yeah,
right of
yeah.
the gentleman.
Directory.
Yeah, like a directory. That was the word I was searching for, and it wasn't coming to me. But we do have some additional sign allotments for that. But I do think that has a very different effect than,
The signboards, yeah,
The signboards.
it almost looks like a movie theater display, and you can't read it, and it's not colorful, and, on and on. But, I mean, again, me kind of looking at that same picture where the cement block is, I don't know if that used to be a tree or something, but, could there be an attractive pole that they could, illuminated, where it could say more than the name in, newspaper print across a black banner, I mean, maybe that's what, it might take a little more time to think about what could be allowed, but I would love to think about if there could be, something that's not obnoxious, but yet really identifies the retail opportunities and dining opportunities that aren't on the first level. So those are my thoughts. John, or anyone else want to?
Yeah. I just want to say I'm very interested in not delaying this again because it's clearly been an issue for quite some time. I noticed that on the plus for sandwich boards, the pluses are for information, advertising, and wayfinding. And I know not everybody's digital in today's world, but most people are. And I think all three of those things, information, advertising, and wayfinding, are easily findable on the phone we all carry in our pockets. So with the snow removal difficulties and reducing clutter, pedestrian safety, I'm with Christine and Bill. I say let's get rid of these like it's been proposed for years and figure out a way to possibly serve the people in Tier 2 if possible. I would also know what the CCLC's opinion on this was.
Sam?
Yeah, I'd also would want to know the CCLC opinion. The one member that wrote in talked about the importance of sandwich boards for her business, and looking at the abundance of them, you can tell that they are vitally important to some businesses. So I really don't want to take a heavy-handed approach. I'd rather take the same, almost a similar approach to our first question and have more guidelines and complaint-based for these sandwich boards. I do think they can be done in a neat way. I do think business owners can be reminded about the need for snow removal, and I think we can accomplish a lot without being over-regulatory when it comes to this matter. Because again, especially for the second-tier shops, and if you can't really discriminate and it's all or nothing, I think you're gonna hurt a lot of businesses by taking these away completely. And I think of all the pressing issues we have in this town. I look forward to the comments tomorrow in the paper from this, but like, it's not as big a deal as some of the other things we have going on. And I do think it's gonna hurt a lot more people than it could potentially help if this can be done in a way that's neat, tidy, and within guidelines that business owners can and will follow.
Yeah.
I was not leading the conversation when these discussions were happening with council in 2017, 2018, 2019, but I was around, and they were difficult. They were difficult at the time. They were difficult at the council table. They were difficult with staff members and members of the public who were engaging on the topic, business owners who, saw these things as very essential to their business. And so I think from an urban fabric thing, these things bug me. There have been nights when I've tripped over them in the middle of town, and I've nicely folded them up and put them up against the building wall to get them out of the way. But I also know that for some businesses, they really do see them as essential. So it's when we get to how we're going to handle this, it is a difficult thing to navigate, and I do think that we need to likely find some balance in that approach, or certainly a runway to give folks time to adjust to this, because I think it is a crucial topic for some of our small businesses.
I appreciate that background. I also wasn't present for those discussions, but what you're saying makes a lot of sense to me.
Yeah, it's a very difficult balancing act, because I can look at that photo and think what it does to our historic character. It makes it look like a new shopping mall down in the Front Range, and Flatiron Crossings, something like that. I mean, it looks tacky. And especially when you have 4 or 5 in a row, I don't know that they catch someone's eyes as much as they really detract from the character of the downtown. And we've done so much to try to preserve this historic character of a downtown, and then instead it's how do we commercialize it the most. And it's a commercialization that kind of can bother some of our visitors. I mean, for some it might be, hey, great, that's where I'm going to go get that new $20,000 watch. For other people, it's like, where do I go to shop here? What do they, I mean, what it reminds me of is a long time ago, we took action to ban real estate offices on the first floor in the commercial core. And it was, there were some grandfathered in, they're still there, but it was like people were walking down the block and all they saw was sign after sign for these homes to buy and nothing to really shop in or do. And that's why, as I'm saying, I'd love to see if we could find a substitute way that the businesses in these tier 3 places can have something. And I also look at the sign boards, and they seem to have been getting bigger and bigger, from kind of these early ones that went out just maybe to say, hey, pizza shop upstairs. And now those are 3 by 5, 3 by 4 type of, they're big. We would not allow a business to hang that sign on outside their door.
That's correct.
And that's what really is wrong. It's that it's gotten, it detracts from the character. It creates its own demand. You have one, I have to have one, and he has to have one, and he has to have one. And so now we have to have 6 out in front of our one building. And I think it deters people from wanting to shop, to tell you the truth, in some places. It's like, oh, we just already passed a whole bunch of this, let's just keep walking by, and it's cheesy, it's tacky. And I don't think it fits in Aspen's character. But I do understand that people have gotten used to this, and that it's maybe something that we'd need to find or look for some sort of substitute. And that's why I was saying I would be willing to say, we can use some of the public right-of-way for a post, for an attractive signboard that is a limited shape and can be changed out with the names, but would work with the character of the downtown, as opposed to, we just brought these in from Key West, and that's what they do down Key West to get everyone to come in their business, It's kind of how it feels like to me. So I think it's degrading to our town. But, so I'm not in the immediate removal camp. I don't want to, and I'm sitting here thinking, ooh, most of the advertising deadlines for the summer probably have passed, and if people were depending on this for their real mojo, maybe they should, they may or may not have had time to place ads in the summer publications. So that kind of bothers me a little bit, but I don't know that for a fact. I just think about that a little bit. So I don't know. I think we are talking about a regulatory framework if they're going forward. And that would be smaller sizes than what we're seeing now. I think you want to require night removal and not allow people to have them out. And if they can't put their own signboard away when they lock the door, that's not a good thing. I don't know what else you would suggest for a regulatory framework.
Go ahead.
I think the kinds of things that we are allowed to regulate in the sign code that apply to all of our signs in town are location, material, size. And so, I think if we, if these were going to be sort of allowed under certain conditions, we could carve off specific spaces that, had clear accessibility issues where snow removal wasn't, as much of an issue. And maybe there's some spaces that are identified where they could exist in some limited locations, or under specific guardrails or constraints. I do like the idea of finding substitutes. I have seen some examples of that. I think that you've got to have a lot of, resource, and this might be something maybe the city doesn't manage to kind of keep updated, those
No,
kind of
no, it'd be up to the
rotating-
business,
kind of rotating signs, because we do have a lot of turnover in our commercial core. And so I think that's one of the nice things about these is that they're portable and they can, change quickly with businesses as they're sort of moving in and out seasonally. But I do think that there's some challenges with some of the substitutes, which sound like great ideas, but I think like keeping up on that
Yeah.
would be a task. And so I think there's interesting ideas that we could pursue, but I think it's helpful to, for us just to kind of, as we start thinking about responses, just to hear the broad, perspective of council on this as we might look at alternatives to what we're doing right now.
I'd also just add how I solve many problems is just reverse engineering it. And as we talked about ACRA and CCLC and getting what you would consider the opposition, these businesses on board with the new ordinance, ask them what would work for them and try to be as tactful as possible with the people that are most affected by this as far as the business community goes, especially from those second-tier spaces, the Amanda Tanakas of the world who think they'd be very hurt by something like this going.
Yeah. Well, like, they never should have let them build all those second-tier spaces. The plaza design was a big thing back in the day, and now it's not. And but how much of, I'm looking down there at the Baldwin block, and that's a great historic block, and does it really have that feeling when you just put a bunch of signboards out in front of it and around it? I think it's distracting.
A crazy
Yep.
idea, but we've all seen those video monitors out at Pickens County Airport. What if we had a couple of those downtown and sold the advertising space to different commercial enterprises?
We could look into it,
Just a thought.
yeah. Anyhow, again, we think about our sign code on the buildings, it has to be natural materials, can't be illuminated or, electronic, no neon. But we have no standard for what these signs can be, I can't wait till one of them starts lighting up and everything at night, yeah.
They exist.
Yeah, they do exist.
Propane powered sandwich boards.
And so again, if you were going to get into regulatory, I think you'd want to talk about how can it be content that's different than just a reprint of your magazine ad? Because that's what a lot of these things look like. They don't look like anything that has flair to it or makes it feel special. It's just like you're turning a page on a magazine while you're walking down the street. Not sure we answered your questions very well.
Yeah, I'd love to summarize.
Please.
For question 1 about enforcing the current sign code, I believe I heard 3 yeses. Was that right?
And that is to tell everyone to take them out tomorrow. I know Sam said no.
I mean, I felt like I was with you as far as like a no for now. It feels sort of like I feel like that you need to develop the regulation before you can enact the code is basically
Yeah.
my thought process. Otherwise, you pull the rug out from underneath people as we go into the summer season.
That's kind of where I'm at, but I want to move in that direction.
I would agree with that because I hadn't thought about that before I made my remarks about people not having an alternative advertising plan in place. And it is rather abrupt, even though this has been talked about for years up until 2020, I guess. So it has been out of focus for a little bit. Yeah, in the interest in moving this forward, let's hold off on the full removal, but I do want to move forward with implementing that at some point.
Yeah.
I was going to say, I know you're trying to summarize, but the summary I had in my head is that there's still work to be done by talking to ACRA and the CCLC, and to try to come up with a regulation for this, and then coming back and asking, do we want to enforce it with this new regulation? Because I don't think you can have one without the other.
Well, and are there substitutes that we could offer so we don't have to have the signboard dilemma
That as well.
going in the future?
That might be an opportunity to use this year to really explore the alternatives and maybe try to partner with the business community to embrace one of the alternatives out there.
Yeah, I think it'd be good for us to try to have a bit of a timeline towards this fall and winter season, so that it doesn't drag on again for a full year cycle. That this is kind of, summer might be considered a little bit of a grace period while we look to whether it's a regulation, and that we'll have our full board back to discuss. We'll have the information from CCLC and ACRA to discuss it and see if there's alternatives, substitutes that we really can offer. And if not, even really questioning on to these parties of what regulation, size, materials of sandwich boards would fit better with our town's core and character.
Okay.
Okay.
So now I'm hearing the majority that staff will go do outreach with CCLC, ACRA, business community, figure out what they would like to see, and then we'll find some potential alternatives to bring back to this council and
And-
look forward to.
Let me just ask this of the council here. Is it safe to be able to let Emmy know that the status quo is not acceptable? That the status quo is not going to be an alternative to these discussions? We've got to find some way to work towards the character, towards the safety, things like that.
Yes.
Okay, that's okay?
Summer grace period and changes coming next fall.
Yeah. Okay,
Great,
thank you.
thank you. All right,
One
one
more.
more.
And I'm so sorry I forgot to introduce our Public Works Director before we started all this. I appreciate your patience waiting. Thank you.
All right, last
Fleets.
topic, bicycle fleets. This is fairly self-explanatory, right? We have close to a dozen businesses in Aspen that rent, sell, or repair bicycles. And in many cases, they stage some or all of those bicycles within our right-of-way. So a couple examples on the screen, you see bikes on the pedestrian mall, that's the photo on the left, as well as on our sidewalks, and that's the photo on the right.
Okay.
Using the right-of-way to stage bike fleets supports bike shops because it's effectively an extension of their leasable space. This is somewhat similar to how we allow restaurants to use the right-of-way in the summers, right?
Do we charge the bike shops the way we charge the restaurants?
Not presently.
With the price of rent in Aspen today, it's tough for many bike shops to be able to afford a space large enough to stage all the bikes they need to rent or sell, to therefore be able to make their rent for that space. So the use of the right-of-way is really a privilege that they've come to depend on. We also do have an existing policy within the engineering department that Aaron just spoke to that supports staging bicycles in the right-of-way. However, that policy limits staging to rental fleets only. So none for sale, none for repair. The downside to staging bikes in the right-of-way is that, similar to the other topics we've talked about tonight, they do create challenges for accessibility, for maintaining the minimum clearance that we need on sidewalks. And they also create challenges for cars that are parked in spots parallel to where bicycles are staged. Those cars need a minimum clearance to open their doors, and a lot of times they don't allow for that. So staff has observed that some businesses do continue to occupy the right-of-way with bikes designated for sale or for repair, which creates challenges for staff in delineating between whether those bikes are for sale or repair, or are they complying with the current policy that is their rentals. Staff has also observed that strict enforcement of the current policy can have a profound negative impact on bike shops operating within those constrained leasable spaces. And so at current, staff is only interacting with these bike shops on a complaint basis or when we walk by and notice that accessibility is impacted. We'll stop in and check with the bike shop and ask them to rearrange for us. So last set of questions here. Does council want to continue allowing bicycles in the right-of-way at all? Bike fleets, excuse me.
Well, I'll say it makes it a little difficult to put in bicycle racks for people who are riding their bicycle and want to park it somewhere. You know, it's kind of like you're taking up the whole right-of-way where you might normally have had parking spots for bikes and things like that. So I don't know that it doesn't make it a little harder to just bike into town. We all see the little signs, don't hang your bike on me, you know, and people. So looking at this picture, I don't know if those were people all parking to go in the Grateful Deli and get a sandwich and lean their bikes against the wall, or were those more the bikes from the business who is now taking up both sides of the sidewalk?
Those are from the business.
Yeah, I mean, that starts to be a little over taking advantage of your grace on this issue. I am really concerned about the parking conflicts. You know, you get down to it, and we're charging people $7 an hour to park. And if they can't open their passenger door without scraping their paint or not really able to squeeze out, that's a problem. I think making sure that none of the tires extend, you know, over the curb or to the curb, where people, you know, if you're supposed to park less than a foot away from the curb, how much space do you have to open your door?
It's a 2-foot clearance is what we recommend.
Okay,
as
it's a minimum. And do the shops seem to be following that?
One of those images we specifically had conversation with because it was precluding ADA access. So we were not seeing the citizenry that was using an ADA spot having viable access to and from their vehicle. They responded accordingly and did change. However, it was something that required a conversation as opposed to just normal activity.
Okay, thank you for that. Pete, what do you got from our colleagues afar?
From Councilmember Benedetti, I think she was supportive of the allowance for rental fleet in the right-of-way, just understanding the spatial challenges for that amount of volume and being able to store that on site inside of a building. Councilmember Guth, however, had a little bit more of a challenge, I guess, in terms of landing on an absolute, because he understood that if you only apply this to bicycles, why wouldn't you also apply something to skis or clothing racks or anything else that would be outside the business? So his stance was a little bit more varied about we could contemplate a policy, but it's kind of hard to do it only by a specific type of product out in the right of way.
Yeah, I don't want to create a free-for-all on Sidewalk Sunday.
It seems to me this question is just about it's because of the amount of space bikes take up.
Yeah.
Skis take up less space, as was pointed out in the memo. I like to encourage bike riding. I think rental fleets should be able to be accessed easily, but the repaired bikes and for sale bikes, and I've been by here quite a bit on Main Street, and they've got bikes on sale. They've got bikes from a couple of years, used bikes on sale. They've got repaired bikes. It's kind of an egregious use, I'd say, of the right-of-way.
Yeah, I think when it was rental only, that is, I don't know how we can ask that be distinguished. Do we want to create a sticker that they put on rental bikes, that this is a Aspen rental, and something like that, so that staff don't have to guess. But creating what is retail space out of the public right-of-way for free is wrong. And that's what's happening. And the restaurants who do that are paying a fee to use that space, and it adds to vitality. This may add to the shop's bottom line, but it doesn't add vitality to the town, per se. The bigger concern I have is what are the rental bikes really doing to control the children on the electric bikes that are going too fast and not wearing helmets. And, you know, to the extent that this is part of the quid pro quo that we're offering, I think continuing to look for, and people have asked me, and I've been under the impression that when you rent a bike, you have to sign that you understand the rules, you'll follow the rules of the road, you won't go too fast on the Rio Grande Trail. But this is a real opportunity to kind of double down on that, because that's gotten to be a public safety issue in its own accord of what are expected of safety measures and training to any of these renters. So I'm better with rental only as well, and really making sure they understand the parking conflict thing. And if we need to put in a regulatory framework, I think it's something that would have fines for violating those premises. That, you know, the sidewalk is not acceptable when you already have the bikes all on the side. What are you kind of thinking about?
It's a similar issue for me, like the other two. Once again, I don't think these are the biggest issues in all of Aspen, but I do appreciate we're talking about them. We have an owner of a bike shop sitting in the audience today. These would be his bikes here. And I appreciate how difficult it is to run a business in this town and the lack of space, especially when it comes to bicycles, of all things. So again, I feel like there's a respectful guideline that can be followed. It can be complaint-based, but I just don't think we need to have the heaviest of hands for something like this. If you talk about how a bike should be 2 feet off of where a car is parked, I think it's more than reasonable to tell the bike owner that they cannot do that. And they're going to lead towards some heavy-handed regulation if they don't behave in an appropriate way. But for something like this, I just don't think we need to regulate it in a heavy hand. But again, I think you got to reverse engineer it with the bike shops and talk about what's reasonable. Talk with CCLC and ACRA, and really understand the implications to some of these business owners of making these decisions, of which I can't speak to at this very moment to say it only should be rental only, because to be honest, having the for sale and other types of bikes out there might be essential to their businesses, and I need to know more about that before I can potentially regulate it in a more heavy tact. But until then, I really believe that a lot of these people are wonderful business owners, and if you told them you're gonna get regulated if you don't behave appropriately with specific guidelines, then I think they'll listen and do their best to make sure they're doing the right thing for the city and all.
Yeah, well, I think that's the approach they've been taking for a while, and
Yeah.
Maybe some have been paying attention and some haven't when they ask them to not do these things.
Yeah.
But we shouldn't have to be policing businesses 6 days a week, 12 weeks of summer. And that's where I get into concerns. And I think that once you start saying for sale, I think you can be sued for discrimination of letting somebody have their coat racks out in the public right-of-way. Why does this one type of business get to use your public right-of-way and I can't? Why can't I put 3 pieces of my furniture out there? I have too much furniture inventory to fit all in the store, and I can barely pay my rent unless I can sell furniture on the right-of-way. You know, it just starts to get uneven.
Yeah, I mean, but that's why, like, I don't know who brought this conversation forward, but that's why it's an interesting conversation, because it's almost ruffling feathers to be like, yeah, we're paying close attention, and regulation might come because of the unfairness of certain acts. So I think it sends up alarm bells to the business community and the bike community that we're looking into this. But again, it needs to be talked about with the people that are going to be most affected before I feel comfortable labeling regulation that I'd be comfortable with.
Okay. I've kind of had this undercurrent through a lot of this discussion. We all travel in different circles, and we all know different people, and we hear different things at different times. But do we get to a point that this is something really to poll our community members about too? I mean, it's their downtown as much as ours. And so in a way, only asking the business owners what they like is not the same as asking the rest of the community how they want their downtown.
It's just where I would start. Sorry
Okay.
if I
Yeah,
didn't
yeah,
say
no,
that. It's just where I would
I'm just trying to
start.
figure out where we really want to keep going with this. Because, I mean, I can imagine between landlords and business owners, they'd all come in and say, give us all your right-of-way. We'd love to sell something else on that. We'd love to have some more signs out there. We'd love to do this.
But I think they
But-
would react differently if they know the hammer is going to come down on them if they don't behave in a way that's acceptable to the community. That's where the balance comes in.
Yeah, well, again, I'm just saying, I think it's important, and you're right about the regulatory. I don't want to be a heavy hammer. I'm not interested in that. But it may have just been how it was being framed, that maybe, because you kind of said sales and rental are okay to still be out on the right-of-way all summer long.
No, I'm more just like status quo, complaint only. And again, like I would want to know what it means to a bike owner to have the sales outside before I say that. But I mean, it's not allowed now, so the city could regulate it, correct? So like, I don't need to change anything for that from this seat. I can just say regulate it because it's not allowed, but also talk to the business owner as to why it's important to them and is there anything that we can or should do because of it. But I'm not endorsing it myself.
Okay, no, I'm just kind of, because we're trying to give collective.
Yes. Understood.
Yeah, and, you know, I would really appreciate it if our landlords would start lowering the rent a little bit so these people don't feel like they need to expand out onto the right-of-way, you know, or overcharging for the spaces that are available, given the national economy. John, I've been ignoring you over here. Did you have any?
Oh, I thought I said my piece.
So, well, maybe Pete has it.
I was just going to add, I think you had asked about question number 2, which is the for sale. And I think both Councilmember Guth and Benedetti had said that they were not interested in expansion of the current policy beyond the rental fleet side of things. They would prefer at least holding the status quo, in some cases, maybe even a contraction.
Okay.
Yeah, and
Okay.
that's more or less where I'm at too, is but with all the insight that you need to gather to really want to move with a collective wisdom on it.
Just following the conversation, one clarifying question, and this is in addition to the 2 that we have up here, but, you know, I do think it's an interesting conversation, and I think even allowing rental fleets is treating bike shops differently.
Yeah.
And I think there's good reason for it. I think we're an outdoor activity community. There's a lot of people in our community that ride bikes, rent bikes, visitors, residents, et cetera. And I guess the question is, in this whole set of policies, whether we're talking about rental or for sale or repaired bikes being out there, is there general support to treat bike shops differently? As a foundational question from other spaces, or because as we think about regulation, if we are going to sort of expand regulation, I do think our question always is this universal, or are we treating one type of business slightly differently for good reason?
Yeah. Well, I think it's obvious we are treating one type of business with one type of product for customer benefit differently.
Well, and I would just add, bikes are a unique thing as far as their space. I can only imagine some of these bike shops, if they had to put all the bikes inside, what it would look like in there. Probably couldn't do it, but you can fit all the clothes in there because they're pretty small, something like that. So
If you look at the window, if you look in the windows at night, you can see what that looks like.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, imagine trying to operate there too. So.
Yeah, no, I'm on board. Is that relatively clear enough for,
Sorry, it's a lot more work, honestly, than anything, but
So I'm hearing that there, is majority support for continuing rental fleets in the right-of-way, and that expanding permissions is
no.
you mean expanding to other,
expanding to for
Sales.
sale and repair fleets.
yeah,
is
that
a
was
no.
not supported by a majority.
No.
Okay. Thank you.
And that, I do think coming up with a sticker that's a 2025 or 2026 rental, so that you can give them out to the shops and talk to them at the same time about because the Roaring Fork Transit Agency, RAFTA, and Pitkin County, and I believe our Open Space and Trails are all starting to form a task force about how do we deal with the safety on the Rio Grande Trail and other areas. The number of people who've come into RAFTA to say they were hit by an e-bike on the trail and the person didn't even stop or this or that, it's just out of control and liable.
That is a hot button issue for sure.
That's a big one.
Especially with new raft, a couple new bus stops on Rafter will be accepting bikes this summer as well. And I do want to reemphasize the point that Ben brought up is we are treating bike shops differently than other businesses.
We are. And it's free space right now. And I'm not saying it should be charged, but it's something that people need to kind of recognize the benefit they're getting and play well, as you said. Okay, is that all for us on this one?
That is all. I just wanted to thank you all for looking at this with us and providing all of your feedback. It's very helpful. We appreciate your willingness to discuss these. We know they're not necessarily easy topics and that you have a lot of other topics that you are talking about these days, so thank you. For next steps for us, we'll prepare a follow-up memo and share that with you just so we are all aligned on what we talked about tonight. And even though it's Aaron and I sitting up here, I want to reiterate that this is really a cross-departmental effort. We've got staff from engineering, CommDev, parks, the clerks, special events, and more that are helping work on this. And so it's really helpful for all of us to have this direction from you. And then we'll also be connecting with CCLC and ACRA and the business community as well too, as we start preparing responses.
Great. Thank you so much for that, Emmy, and appreciate that. Have a good week going forward. We have Pete ask our new Public Works Director to come up, and we'll do some introductions before we go into that special meeting.
I thought we could just take a few minutes just
Yeah.
to have Daniel come up to the table if he's
And
willing.
my apologies, I just started with Emmy because she had been here since 20 of and kind of spaced it doing this first. Thanks for hanging around.
So Daniel is the latest member of the city manager's office, and we were very happy to have him on board. He started last week. Yep, last Monday. Very new to the organization, but has already hit the ground running. And I'll just let him introduce himself and give you a little bit of background.
Yeah, please, thank you. Thanks for being here.
Yeah, happy to be here. So I'm Daniel Lawson, the new Public Works Director here for the city. I spent the last decade in public service working at the National Park Service, most recently as their Director of Facility Management, so responsible for all the utilities, roads, trails, infrastructure, housing, et cetera, that supports that highly visible public setting. Really excited to be here in Aspen. Before working for the Park Service, I spent about a decade working in private practice for a small landscape architecture historic preservation firm in Athens, Georgia, and spent some time working also in design, construction, and planning for municipal government back there. So really excited about Aspen, really drawn to the culture you all have here. Across all of that, my goal has been, building and sustaining and supporting really strong teams, which Aspen definitely has in spades. And so looking forward to serving the public and the community here in Aspen.
Well, we're delighted to have you, and we're glad you chose us. All right.
Welcome.
Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Daniel.
Thanks, Daniel.
All righty. Let's see, I don't have my agenda up here. Yeah. You want to, work session, we don't need a motion to or anything to end it, but we do need the citations to go into a special meeting.
Well, first we need to call to order, and I do.
Okay, yeah. We had regular meeting first, so I would like to call to order a special meeting of the City Council for April 6, 2026. And Nicole, will you call the roll, please?
Counselor Benedetti, Counselor Doyle,
Here.
Counselor Guth, Counselor Rose,
Here.
Mayor Richards.
Here. Thank you very much.
I would just ask if there might be able to take public comments, because this is a special meeting.
It is a special meeting. Is there anyone here with a special comment for us? There does not look like anyone online or in the audience, so we will close the public comment portion of this section.
Okay. Thank you, Mayor Richards. Staff is requesting an executive session pursuant to Colorado Revised Statute, Section 24-6-402, subsection 4, subsection A, the purchase, acquisition, lease, transfer, sale of any real, personal, or other property interests, except that no executive session shall be held for the purpose of concealing the fact that a member of the local public body has a personal interest in such purchase, acquisition, lease, transfer, or sale. Subsection 4, subsection B, conferences with an attorney for the local public body for purposes of receiving legal advice on specific legal questions. And subsection 4, subsection E, determining positions relative to matters that may be subject to negotiations, developing strategy for negotiations, and instructing negotiators. And subsection 4, subsection F, personnel, but I believe you've taken that issue off the agenda.
Correct.
So the third item, which was my annual review, will be reset on a later date.
Great, we're just waiting until we have a full council.
Correct. The items we would like to continue to discuss tonight that were noticed or are the lease, transfer, or acquisition of real property or property interests and contract negotiations and communication with counsel regarding such subjects due to market forces, negotiation strategies, and confidentiality demands of parties involved, and necessitated by the subject of the specific legal advice, which further disclosure would be a detriment to the city's strategic position. The exact properties cannot be disclosed. Conferences, the second item is conferences with the city attorney to provide legal advice regarding issues associated with the entrance to Aspen and use of city open space. I did want to clarify on this topic a little bit further.
Please.
This is not to discuss any issues regarding the bridge. This is discussions on topics related to the use of bus lanes between the Maroon Creek Roundabout and Buttermilk. So I know that the public is very interested in this topic, and I just wanted to provide some clarity around that. So
Thank
it
you.
does, because there's only 3 of you here, it does take a unanimous vote to go into executive session on these topics.
Yeah, so if anybody wants to go home early, they have to vote no.
Tempting.
I'll make a motion to go into executive session.
I'll second.
Okay, Nicole, will you call the roll, please?
Counselor Doyle,
Yes.
Counselor Rose,
Yes.
Mayor Richards.
Yes. And we will be ending the special meeting downstairs so grassroots can go home. Can you?
Correct. We will convene down in Electric Pass. My understanding is you will convene, there's no further business on the special meeting agenda, so you will be convening both the executive session and the regular meeting out of Electric Pass. And grassroots, I think, will be signing off. So, and a copy of this meeting will be, a recording of this meeting will be kept by the city clerk for not less than 90 days.
Great. Thank you, grassroots. We appreciate it.